Welcome to episode 78 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's #1 open source film photography podcast. My name is Mike Ekman, and we are back with another episode. For 2 straight episodes, the guys and I talked about topics we all know a great deal about, buying and selling cameras and blogging. For this episode, we're going back to our roots, cameras. Which cameras, you might ask? We have no idea. This is an open source podcast after all, so we've hit the record button, opened up the waiting room, and invited you all to talk about the whole reason we're here. We are short a host tonight as Anthony is traveling back from a trip to Michigan, but have no fear, as 3 of your favorite hosts will be here to pick up the slack. From Sydney, Australia, where the greatest Nicole Kidman movie ever made was filmed, is Theo Panagopoulos. Hey Theo, are you as big of a fan of the cinematic masterpiece BMX Bandits as I am?
Oh, of course. That's gone down into Australian folklore. Everybody loves BMX Bandits, and you could never say anything bad about it. And if anyone does, I'll fight you to the death.
For once, I completely agree with you. And from Yellow Springs, Ohio, is the guy who insists he's done making 6-hour round trips to pick up large camera lots, is Paul. Hey, Paul, how are you doing on your quest to stop torturing yourself?
Not very well, Mike. Not very well at all. I think I've got a 10-hour road trip coming up later this week to drive up to the Lower Peninsula and look at a bunch of musty old cameras.
Well, we got a couple people in the waiting room, so let's open the doors and let them in. Well, as I said a few minutes ago, we are short a host. So we have 3 hosts, and we have 3 of my favorite guests. AJ Gentile. AJ, welcome back.
Hey, guys. Thanks, Mike.
Miles Libak. Miles, welcome back again.
Hey, everyone.
Right. And with mic on but video off is Johnny Martyr. Johnny, welcome back. Maybe his mic isn't on. Well, we can come back to Johnny. So real quick before we get started, by the time you hear this, this won't be true, but I just want to let these guys know I still haven't pushed out the last episode yet. Part of that is just due to my own dragging of my feet. My birthday was last week, so that threw me off. But I had a snafu with editing where I made it completely done with editing. I spent 4 hours on it, and my laptop crashed, and it just completely corrupted the edited file. Thankfully, the raw audio was fine. So I basically just had to start over again. But I got to tell you, I don't love audio editing. It's not bad. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but there's something about editing the exact audio twice that it's just mind numbing. It's like, didn't I do this already? But I did finish it, so it'll be out before this episode ever airs. So if anybody's wondering, how could this be episode 78 when there hasn't been a 77, it is coming.
I thought I was maybe rambling too much.
No.
Happy birthday, Mike.
Thank you. That's only happened with one caller, and that's definitely not you. So,
AJ, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. Mike reckons it's the best editing that's ever been done, and this would have been the podcast that would have taken us to superstardom and influence level.
Right.
But, not to be now.
So long as it takes us beyond the I Dream of Cameras.
Yes.
Who?
I think every podcast has had that episode that just never aired, that got deleted or wasn't recorded. And we had one. It was like one of our very first episodes. In fact, it was the first episode Paul ever appeared on.
Oh,
When we never really officially had him become a host. It's just he showed up, and then I did never turn on the recording throughout the entire episode. And then I say, hey Paul, could you please come back? I'm really sorry, but everything we talked about was lost. And he's come ever since. So unfortunately, the first ever appearance of Paul on the Camerosity podcast has been lost to the digital. And then there was another one where I didn't turn it on for like the first 15 minutes, but at least I caught it. And then we finished the episode, and then we faked the intro again, and then I just edited out of sequence, and you'd never know, and it sounded fine. So anyway, who cares about editing?
and by the way, thanks guys for your inspiration. I'm working on my blog.
Are you really? Awesome.
Oh yeah.
What's it going to be called?
Well, I don't have a name for it yet. Well, right now I'm still going through. Because I started when I had logged my podcast with Buzzsprout. It was called Through My Lens.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just going to be. I don't know. I'm still working on it.
Well, Camerosity.com is taken. You can't have it. We can't have it either.
We do have Camerosity.net, though.
.net, yeah, uh-huh.
Okay.
Wait, you have that, Paul, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. Okay. I could change it, but like I don't think people find podcasts through their domain. Really, it's more the podcast search engines or word of mouth or something. But it bothers me that the guy who owns the .com version isn't using it. And I've even gotten in touch with him and I've talked to the guy, but he thinks it's worth like $10,000. It's like, dude, it's worth zero if you're not using it.
Exactly.
During the intro, I made a little jab at Paul about round trips to pick up cameras, and he says he's got a trip to the UP coming up. You want to share some details about that, Paul?
Well, I'm hopeful it's gonna. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. It's a Facebook Marketplace deal. It's 4x5 and 5x7 wooden cameras.
Okay.
The interesting thing also was there's a Graflex XL with a couple lenses. It's sort of cool and some roll film backs for it. But what got Anthony so excited was there's a bunch of film.
Yes.
There was some FK and what else was it, Mike? There was some FK and there was some 5x7 sheet film.
Yeah. I don't remember. I remember the FK because Anthony got excited for that.
Yeah, and there's probably one roll, and it's probably been stored in a barn for the last
Yeah.
10 years, so it's probably no good. But anyway, I may take a run up to Saginaw to see this stuff later this week.
Yeah. Yeah. If getting these things from people who, found it in an estate or in the garage or the attic or something, you just never know the condition until you see it.
And you drive 5 hours each way. You sort of want to have some idea what you're looking at before you do it.
Right.
So, and you can't rely on people. I mean, they have the best intentions. They're not trying to cheat you. They're not trying to mislead you. They just don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know, what they're looking at. Hey, I think Johnny's fine. Johnny is with us finally. Johnny, how's your audio? Are you?
Hey. Yeah, little technical issue. Wasn't expecting to have time to join tonight, but I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
We did our last episode, which was on blogging, and we talked a bit about just some of the inspirations we've had with why we do it. But one perspective that you would have had differently is that you have both a blog, but also a business site because you promote yourself and, share your professional photography through there too. So, I mean, you probably spend, I think, a good amount of time in front of the keyboard. Is that a good assumption or no?
Yeah, basically, if I'm not shooting or processing, I think I'm probably in front of a computer or trying to get away from the computer, which I'm sure you guys can relate to as well. I guess I have a little bit different of a path than you guys. I'm using the blog and the social media more to, because I have to talk about this stuff with somebody, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And also, I guess it does function a little bit as a promotional thing. But honestly, like, I don't think most of my clients actually read any of that stuff or anything like that. It's mostly I'm just talking to fellow geeks like you guys.
So, I mean, we've spoken before, and most people know you as a Leica fan. A majority of what you shoot is on Leicas. But in the last maybe year and a half, you've introduced medium format into your stable, your camera bag, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So what are you shooting? And tell me, like, I want to hear how you sell this to a young couple, let's say, getting married. Like, is that something that you have to convince them to do, or do you just bust? Well, first of all, what camera is it? Give us a little bit of a sneak peek into how that's done in the 21st century as a wedding photographer.
All right, I'll see if I can do my best. Yeah, I've actually been kind of struggling because years ago I was trying to work medium format into things, and I was using just a Mamiya 645, and it was fine, but just wasn't really connecting with it. I've had a long history of not connecting with medium format cameras. In fact, when I started doing weddings with a company much larger than mine, we were shooting Hasselblads in the early 2000s and shooting so all the formal stuff was on Hasselblad and the candid stuff was digital back when we were using like Fuji Finepix DSLRs. And so one of my jobs was just keeping the backs loaded on Hasselblads for my boss as a second shooter. So I've been working with medium format for a long time. It's no stranger to it, but I just haven't really clicked with any cameras. But when I was in France last year, I brought my Voigtlander Perkio, and I was just like, man, why didn't I use this camera more? And I realized the reason why I wasn't using the camera more, and the reason why it appealed to me is just, I guess, as a Leica shooter, wanting something small, compact, hard, high resolution, heavy hitting. And that's what I guess I don't like about like Hasselblad and the Mamiyas and that kind of thing. They're relatively compact, but still just not quite there for me. So yeah, the Perkio France photos kind of really inspired me to get a folding medium format rangefinder 6x6. And so I needed something reasonably fast for the wedding stuff, especially if I was going to shoot like 6400 ISO. So I've landed on the Welta Weltor of the 1930s and the Zeiss Super Ikonta B, which is, I guess the model number is what, 53216. And I've basically landed on these because I was looking for that faster 82.8 lens, which is actually hard to find a coupled folding rangefinder with an 82.8 lens. I guess you guys probably know that better than I do. So I've been kind of struggling actually to find working copies, good professional grade copies of these things, or someone to service them for me, because I really need two of each for serious work. And I'm not really selling that per se yet, but I had a client earlier this year who also shoots film. I met him at another wedding. He's more of a large format guy and he's an architect. So I was like determined to bring the medium format workflow I was kind of like working on in the back of my mind to his wedding, because I thought, that would kind of approximate what his interests were. And so he was happy and kind enough to let me experiment, I guess, a little bit by bringing, unfortunately, just one Zeiss Super Ikonta. So I was like loading and reloading very frantically during that wedding. Yeah, I typically don't try to sell what I'm doing in terms of like the format too much to couples. Like I don't get too far in the weeds with technical stuff. People are just more or less enchanted by the handcrafted film thing. You don't have to get too deep with it. So
Well, and then, obviously medium format offers, more resolution. So you could probably do bigger enlargements. And you've shared some of your photos you've gotten. And as we all know, a medium format 6x6 camera, folding or non-folding, can produce some wonderful images. So I suspect that your customers are just impressed with what you're able to get out of ye old folding camera, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Actually, the Zeiss Super Ikonta has been like an unexpected treat, I think, is a good way to put it. I was working with Starbucks last year and shot the Pride Festival in DC, and I used the Super Ikonta for that, and it just makes people smile seeing like this antiquated, it's designed in the 30s. I got as new as a copy as I could, 1950s. I'm actually waiting on a second one right now. Yeah, I mean, it's antiquated and it's hokey looking, and people are like, what is that? And they're just happy to have their photo taken with it. And so my normal Leica work is very candid, as you guys I think are probably familiar with.
So Theo, what is the fastest lens you can get on the world's greatest camera? Is there a 2.8 for the Mamiya 7?
No, there's not. It's a 3.5 or a 4.
3.5, okay.
Yeah, that's what kept me out of the Mamiya 7 for sure.
My favorite camera of all time was the Bell Machina 67, which did have the 82.8 neck core on it.
Yes.
That was, I sold them when they were new. I was a dealer for them, and I wound up buying two of them, and I used them all over the world. Just literally, that was my travel camera because the lens was just terrific, and it was so compact. And having a built-in meter was a good thing too for me at that time. It made me work a little quicker.
Are they rangefinders?
Yeah, it's a range.
There, okay.
Yeah, Paul, that's cool that you bring that up. That camera has definitely been on my list. I guess it's a little lower down because I was looking for 6x6 so I can maximize my number of shots, and I also kind of subscribe to that Hasselblad, square is the perfect image circle for a lens kind of thing. But yeah, the Pebble Machina is definitely something I was looking at. I feel like from what I'm gathering, they're difficult to get any kind of service for now.
Well, they're relatively trouble-free. The meters are the weak spot on them, like they are like all electronics. The shutters are easy, so in theory, anybody can repair the shutter. Mine were, I don't want to say they were abused, but they were used really, really heavily. And the only thing that I ever did was I broke the glass out of the viewfinder, and that was me. It wasn't the camera. But you do see a lot of them with no meters, but you get past that, it still works fine.
So Johnny, with using this camera like the Super Ikonta, using like the Mamiya 7 or the Plumber Machina or the more modern cameras or even the Leicas with their great rangefinder, I can sort of relate to that low light because you do a lot of shooting in low light. How do you manage with the Super Ikonta, because they're not exactly the the brightest of the rangefinders?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's been one of my requirements too. I expected to have to adapt a little bit to something that wasn't going to be, Leica or Voigtlander bright in terms of the brightness of the rangefinder and the low light performance of it. I've actually found that these two models, and I don't know, honestly, I don't have a lot of experience with medium format folders, or at least not rangefinder folders. But I've actually found that when they're completely cleaned and serviced, they're reasonably bright. And the well to well tour, the viewfinder eyepiece is a little bit larger than the Zeiss-Ikon Super Ikonta, but the Super Ikonta's total window size, I guess frame size, is larger. I haven't done the math yet on what the effective base lengths are on them, but I found that the Super Ikonta is actually really deadly accurate. I never miss focus with it. Like, it's 100% reliable. So even like when I've been shooting like this wedding reception for the architect I was talking about, another wedding I did. Well, that's actually the only one I've done in 6400 conditions using Ilford Delta. And actually the weak part wasn't the camera in that equation or the viewfinder. It turned out to be that Ilford Delta 3200, the numbers on the back are written so, because with the Zeiss, it does the red window just for the first shot, and then after that, it's automated. Once that's done, yeah, I actually had a great time shooting that at 6400. The particular Super Ikonta I got is the one with the larger viewfinder. I guess the predecessor that was the original Super Ikonta 6x6 has a smaller viewfinder, so that was like definitely an important point for me. That with the Opton Tessar, as opposed to and I have had no flaring with that thing. I've been shooting it like at the beach and like in bright, like terrible midday weddings, and it's been great.
These have the benefit of the post-war lens coatings. They made Super Ikontas from before and after the war, but you get the early post-war ones, and this one even has, I can clearly see the pinkish purple coating, and I think that's going to help control the flare. Plus, not to be snobbish, but it's Zeiss. This was the best thing you could get. If you consider in TLRs to get a 2.8 taking lens, you're going with a Rollei 2.8. Some of the most expensive medium format cameras have a 2.8 lens, and this right here, while you were talking, I was looking at my shelf of all my 6x6 folders, and this one's actually Anthony's, but I don't have any other ones that have a 2.8 lens. Are all 3.5s. But you had mentioned viewfinder brightness, and one thing that once you get in the collecting cameras, you start to see, especially with Zeiss cameras, both before, during, and slightly after the war, is viewfinders that have prisms tend to, as long as they're clean, that is, tend to survive a little bit better than beam splitters, because you basically have just a piece of glass. You don't have to worry about a semi-reflective material lowering the amount of light. That's why I would not recommend this camera. But the Kodak Medalist, for anybody who's ever held one, the viewfinder on those is usually very bright. It's because they use prisms. The Agfa Karat, the earlier one with the split image viewfinder, those are all prisms. There's no beam splitter in there. So assuming they're clean and not damaged, generally they're going to be a little bit brighter than the later models that started to use mirrors. I want to also say too, in spirit with the open source podcast, we did not know you were coming. Like, this was not canned, but I'm so glad you did show up, Johnny. It's just, like I said, it's a niche of what we do it's new and old at the same time. I love the insights in how you've been able to incorporate medium format, transitioning between rectangular and square, looking for those shots, and I think it's super cool. Plus, you do shoot other things too. I've tried, most people probably don't know this, but I've been a bad influence on Johnny, and I just randomly send him cameras and say, play with this. And he doesn't have time, and I don't blame you, but I know you have other cameras too that you love Pentax, and that's probably not something people would know just based on what you share. So please keep coming back and keep doing what you're doing.
Hey, yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate the cameras too, even though I didn't get a chance to use them. I read all your guys' articles about all these camera reviews, and I sit back and envy. Like, sometimes I feel like maybe I look a bit silly. Like, someone will post an image of like the cheapest like Petri 7S or something, and I'll be like in the comments like, oh, I've always wanted one of these. And people are like, well, why don't you get one? It's like $10 or something. And it's like, I don't have time to learn another, it's like I have like the medium format, the 6x6 thing that I've been kind of working on has been about a year long trial of like buying a couple different reading up on various cameras. I've probably been to many of the pages here, reading articles about each camera and what I thought would work, read about the Plowable, read about these guys, and then like finding a suitable example and trying to work with it. And it's a process to really get to know a camera. And I don't have as much time for that as I wish I did, but I appreciate all the resources that you guys put out there into the world to help people like me and just, give us some fodder for creativity.
Miles, you were doing some medium format. You had loaned me your Ensign Selfix, which I believe you've passed on to somebody else, right?
Yeah, I gave it away to someone in the Camerosity Facebook
Oh, you
page.
did? Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool. Did you decide to move away from medium format, or is it just something you were playing with for a short period of time? Like, what was your journey?
Yeah, I think I got into the Ensign from someone on the Classic Lenses podcast Facebook page. And that was my first medium format camera. And it was approachable because 6x9 is the same aspect ratio as 35. And so it felt a little more manageable to try out. And then I think I passed it on because I eventually wanted to get a 645 folder, which I haven't purchased yet, but wanted to try something that's a little more economical on film.
There's a 645 Super Ikonta. I don't remember the model number, but they made them in that aspect ratio as well.
Yeah, I have seen those. And I do like, one thing I really like about the Super Ikonta line is that I think particularly the one that Johnny has, and I'm not sure if all of the pre-war ones, but they have provision for strap lugs. And very few of the folders of the era have strap lugs. That's a really nice thing about the Super Ikonta.
That's a good point. Like that was one problem that I had with some research too for a practical antique camera was strap lugs and an accessory shoe. The strap lugs on the Super Ikonta, while it does have them, they're kind of a pain in the ass when the cameras fold it. It's back heavy because the way the lugs are oriented, so it's always kind of clanging against you. But once it's open, it's fine. And the Welta Weltor 6x6 is also, you're talking about 645. It also does 645, but the mask for that, there's an insert you put in the back for it, and then there's a little slider on the viewfinder to convert the viewfinder. And that mask is hard to find. I'm sure it could be like replicated somehow, but they're really hard to find. The cameras are somewhat hard to find, at least in the United States. It seems like they're much more popular in Europe, but that might be a good, I mean, it's very small. It's smaller than the Super Ikonta. And I think the build quality is almost comparable. It's a little bit lighter, and it doesn't have the auto frame spacing thing that the Super Ikontas, I think, are somewhat plagued with. That's kind of what I'm wrestling with now.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it doesn't have the accessory shoe. So that's the other problem with it is like, I really wanted something with a meter and that I could put a modern meter on. So the Ikonta really fills that, because I like to use the little modern OLED meters.
Did you end up sending your Super Ikonta to Jurgen to get it all sorted out?
So I haven't yet. I'm waiting for a second one to come that's been modified to suppose the one I bought was supposedly serviced, and but I'm still having a few issues with the mechanism with some films. I'm not sure if that's a condition thing or that's a design feature.
Is it troubling with transport?
So I've got two issues. One is the overlapping frame issue, which happens to me when I shoot T-Max 400, but it doesn't happen to me when I shoot T-Max 100 or Delta 3200. So I think that's probably like, the film size.
Almost certainly the thickness of the paper. Over the years, the paper that medium format film has is much different from what it was 70, 80 years ago. And I know that some of those cameras, especially the ones that have the automatic stop, where you're not using the red window, they don't like thinner backing paper. So I'm not saying that's what your problem is, but I suspect that's what it could be.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right about that. That issue, I think there's a few different ways to solve it that are a little hokey in terms of like attaching additional backing paper. And then
right.
or I think you can wind past the number 1 mark by a certain amount. Like they're these kind of hokey fixes to it, but they aren't, they don't require major surgery, so maybe they're passable. The other problem I'm having though, and I think other people have this too with it, is that if I depress the shutter release just slightly because I think I'm going to take the shot and I decide not to, it fouls up the mechanism and makes me advance to the next shot. So then I lose a frame, and that is driving me crazy because I at least with the 6x6, I'm pretty deliberate. I don't just fire off like machine gun with the Leica M. So that's driving me up a wall. So that's what led me to seek one that's been modified. So the advance is completely through the red window on this Ikonta that I'm waiting for. So we'll see how that works out.
I've had that as you were talking, I was grinning only because I've experienced that before with many cameras that have, it's the double image prevention feature. That's a separate mechanism from the shutter release. So when you're the action of pressing down on the shutter release, you're essentially engaging two separate mechanisms in the camera. And those two events do not happen at the exact same time. So if you're real light, and I do this too, where you kind of like you get used to with a 35 millimeter camera, pressing that shutter release down just barely to the point where it's about to fire, and you hold your finger there to the exact moment, and then you just go down that last 20% or whatever to fire the shutter. But with your folding cameras, all of that stuff is happening through linkages because the shutter has to move forward and backward as it's closing. And I'm not going to say that it can't be fixed because I don't know. Jurgen would be a guy that if someone knew, he'd be a good person because he has a lot of experience with the folding cameras. But unfortunately, that's just another thing of just how things used to be. Some cameras though, and if I look at Anthony's, if that ever happens, you can still engage the shutter. You just kind of have to jam your finger down near the door hinge. You can still fire the shutter if it's cocked and you've already engaged the double image prevention. So you don't have to waste your film. I don't know if you ever tried that before.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I knew that was a thing because the first Ikonta that I purchased at a local camera store had an issue with the top mounted shutter release even working at all. So I kind of was, when I was like learning it, I was releasing the shutter that way. And I am aware that is a thing, but it's really difficult when I've got 20 people around me waiting for their portrait, and I'm shuffling handfuls of 120 film in and out of a camera that's not made to go this fast. Actually, it's funny. The first wedding that I shot with the Super Ikonta, I unintentionally unscrewed the rewind knob almost to the point of it falling out of the camera because I was working it too quickly. And it was pretty scary at the moment because I'm like in the middle of things and thought that
the film advance knob.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess that center screw is just holding that whole flipping crank thing assembly on there, and somehow I guess I was just working it really fast and it came loose. I hadn't had that problem before. If you look at it, it can work loose pretty easily is my point. So yeah, I've got like a number of these like sort of like, I guess that's classic Zeiss problems, right? Like it's kind of the cameras overcomplicate it. So that's why I'm kind of leaning towards the Well Tour, which actually, Mike, you and I had talked about. I had an interest in. I just think Welta cameras are so fucking handsome. Sorry, my language. I just get excited about those cameras. Like they're so austere and classy looking to me, and they use real leather, kind of like the Ikontas. And they get burnishing in the leather, and I just think they're just really like utilitarian looking and small and simple. And you kind of steer me away from the Weltini, and I took that advice. I forgot the reasons that we came to on that.
It has 3 different interlocks. It has a double image prevention. It has something with the shutter release. It's like a Kodak. It's like a Kodak Retina, but made in the most inconvenient way possible, right? Because especially the rangefinder model, what they did was if you picture a Kodak Retina pre or post war, the door is always on the right side, and the viewfinder's on top. Well, on the original Weltini, the door was also on the right side, and the film advance knobs and everything are on top. Well, when they wanted to add the rangefinder, they didn't know how to do it easily, so they just put the rangefinder on the bottom of the camera. So when you're looking through the viewfinder, the rangefinder is technically on the bottom, so you have to flip it upside down. So the door is to the left now, which isn't that big of a deal, but your advanced knobs are now on the bottom of the camera. Maybe the later ones that I'm only referring to the pre-war one. In performance wise, I mean, it's usually they have like a Schneider Xenon or Xenar or something on it that's going to make nice images. But if that's your style of camera, I wholeheartedly just stick with the Retina. They're wonderful cameras. They're if they've been taken care of and serviced, they're going to be very reliable, very rugged, well built cameras.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a whole lot of room in the stable for another 35. That's going to be slower to use than my 1930 Leica. But yeah, all those things that you're describing, the 6x6 Welta is really great, except that those design issues that you're talking about, how they flip the camera over. I guess they did something similar with the medium format, because the shutter release is on the left side of the camera and the viewfinder is on the right side of the camera. And it's like it's a real pain to get used to ergonomically. But it, like I said, it's much smaller than the Super Ikonta. It has the same specs in terms of you can even get the Tessar. I think it's a 75 instead of an 80, but it's a 2.8. I have the Schneider Xenon, which I have on my Retina also, which is a great lens. It does the Ruby window advance, so you don't have to deal with like the advanced issues. Although for the fast pace work, it is nice having a normal advance on these cameras where you have extra steps of like having to charge the shutter before, and you have to change the shutter speed before you charge the shutter. And if you change the shutter speed after you charge the shutter, then you're going to, like, it's just like this ordeal. So having that automatic advance is really nice for fast work, which is, my primary purpose. So I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between the Welta and the Zeiss for those reasons. It's like the Zeiss is kind of the nicer hot rod camera. It gets a lot of attention, but the Welta, I think, is probably going to be more practical. I can even just take the top plate right off of it and adjust the rangefinder very easily. So there's a lot of practical benefits to it.
Sometimes less is more.
Yeah.
We promised people some gas, so I wanted to come back to Miles. You had said that you were looking into 6x4.5 cameras, and while there's plenty to choose from, the Japanese made quite a number of excellent 6x4.5 cameras because they were always in the interest of economics, right? Like that's why half frame was much more popular in Japan than it was in most other parts of the world. Well, they really, really like the 6x4.5 format. So anytime you see a Japanese 1950s folding camera that says semi SCMI, that means it's a 6x4.5 camera. If Anthony was here, I'm sure he would talk about his semi Leotax, which he absolutely adores and has gotten wonderful shots from. But I wanted to make a recommendation of if there was one really nice 6x4.5 Japanese camera, this is called the Konica or Konica Pearl 4. This is the last in the line. It is it's less common than some of the other ones, but there's also a Pearl 3, which generally sells for a bit cheaper than the 4s do. It doesn't have the bright line window, but otherwise it's got the same shutter, same lens. It's a coupled rangefinder. I wish you guys could see through the viewfinder. It's very bright, very clear. This is, in my mind, as far as 6x4.5 folding cameras go, this is the top dog. So if I want to instill some gas into Miles or anybody listening, and I was looking to get this aspect ratio camera, the Konica Pearl 3 or 4, if you could find it, this is the one that I would recommend.
Are the frame lines in the Pearl illuminated?
Yeah, that's the 4. So the 4 has the bright line finder. So it's basically like a modern 35 millimeter camera. So I look through it and you can see the frame lines. There's parallax correction marks. The rangefinder's right in the middle. I don't have a 3 here.
Is the focus front cell focus or
it's a helix?
Okay,
like a Retina. So it's basically like, I mean, honestly, it's very similar to a Kodak Retina, just larger. So gas engaged, the Konica Pearl 3 or Pearl 4. I know Cheyenne Morrison was a huge fan of the 4. What do you got there, Paul?
That's a 66 with a Voigtlander Voigtar 75-35. But this might fill the bill, Johnny. It's just such a nice shutter.
Yeah, I love the Voigtlander Perkio. My wife picked one up for me years ago, and I love how small and lightweight it is. And I am a Voigtlander fan, but I got to have that coupled rangefinder for fast work.
I like the Bessa's. The Bessa has the shutter release in the door, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's super convenient. It's ergonomically very pleasing where they put it. And as we
Oh, is it front by the lens? Is that what you're describing?
No, it's actually in the door. A little lever pops out of the side of the door and it's curved. So you can kind of rest your index finger on it. And when you're ready to fire the shutter, it's just a gentle downward motion of your index finger and it fires the shutter. Like they put the linkage in the door. And what's cool about it is when you fold it shut, the linkage just retracts on its own. When you reopen the door, it automatically pops out ready to go.
Sounds nice.
Very German. Just don't drop it. I have a camera that I shot just the other day, since we were talking about Footlanders. This was a Kurt camera that I initially wasn't going to use, but I was reorganizing my film boxes and I realized that I have a surplus of 127 film. I got a bunch of rolls of the Rirapan 100, which they expired in 2018. So I kind of want to go through some of them before they get too much older. And I was trying to think of a 127 camera that I wanted to shoot. Paul, you showed the Gallus Durlux, that French camera that it's like a Foth Derby, but it's all metal.
Right. It's the French version of the Foth Derby.
Yeah, which is a wonderful camera, and I'm quite certain it would make great pictures, except the focal plane shutters on those almost never work. And the one I have, not only are the curtains shredded, but it has a fault where as you wind it, the two curtains separate. Like they eventually close, but as you're advancing it, it actually creates a gap which sprays light across your film as you're winding the camera. So basically ruining any attempt that you have to use it. But I ended up going with this little guy. This is called a Foatlander Perkio. It looks just like a regular folding camera, but it's 127 and it shoots 3 centimeter by 4 centimeter. You could always tell that when you look at a 127 camera because it'll have the two red windows. They did not print exposure numbers on the backing paper for 127 film for that size. So anytime you see a 3x4 127 camera, you have to use both windows. So you have numbers 1 through 8. You use each one twice. So you use 1 in the right window, then you advance till the 1 appears in the left window, make another exposure. Then you do your third exposure when the number 2 is in the right window, your fourth exposure when the number 2 is in the left window, and so on until you get 16 exposures. But this was a joy to use. And I forget how much I like folding cameras because when I'm not using it, I just love being able to fold it shut and you can stick it in your shirt pocket. I mean, this thing is so tiny and cute. And I'm like a lot of us here, I adore these Footlander cameras.
I was looking before, I was trying to get into the Pearl discussion. I couldn't remember if I had the 2 or the 3. I've got the 2, which is their cheapest chips, but they punch way above their weight as well. I've had absolutely fantastic results with the 2.
What's the top shutter speed on that one?
Isn't
it 300?
500.
Oh, it is 500.
It is 500.
Okay.
The results I got from that was so magnificent. I actually love the top plate of it as well. With the Zebra rangefinder piece. They are most beautiful little camera. So, but yes, I agree. The Pearl was a good suggestion before.
Now I need to look up what the difference. Okay. So the only difference it looks like between the 2 and the 3 is that the 3 has the auto stop film advance, whereas the 2 you just keep winding.
Yeah.
Which honestly is probably better to have the 2. So everything I said before about the 3, it sounds like the 2 has the 1/500 shutter. It still has the great lens, the excellent design, accurate rangefinder. The only thing it doesn't have is the film stop, which is what Johnny was talking about earlier with the Zeiss. That can be problematic. So in a way, your 2 might even be a better buy than the 3 or the 4, because for one, you can get it cheaper and it's less likely to jam.
And the Hexar lens on it is just so sharp. Amazingly sharp.
All right. Well, 50% of the Camerosity hosts fully endorse the Konica Pearl 2, 3, or 4. Apparently there's a 2B also, but that was, I guess, a discount model. Anyway, well, there you go, Miles. So you'll have to come back if you buy one of these.
Will do. It's inevitable.
AJ, how can we inspire you to spend money?
Are you kidding me? I'm following everything you're saying. I'm following it on eBay to see what's up there. I look at the Perkio. Honestly, I love 6x9.
6x9, okay.
Yeah, I'm loving the 6x9. I mean, I shoot a lot of 35, a lot of 4x5. But since I got the Horseman working there with Paul's recommendation to get some roll film back, I've been loving that. So I'm looking for something more 6x9. I don't know, 6.7. I don't know. It doesn't intrigue me as much as a 6x9 does.
Well, okay, so I have a 6x9 recommendation for you. Now, there is a big caveat though. These cameras are known to not always have the best bellows, but they're almost
Okay.
always dirt cheap. And I have been successful at finding a couple of them where the bellows were good, which is the Kodak Tourist. There was the Tourist 1 and 2, and they do not sell for much, but they usually have the Anastar or the Anastan lens. Either one of them is really, really nice. The Tourist was probably the end of the era in which Kodak made good folding cameras with good lenses. It's got a very 1950s
Okay.
ish design with like a Bakelite top plate. They do make them with like a really low end, like a 6.3 lens. You want to stay away from that one, but they make a Tourist with a 4.5 Anastan and then the 3.5 Anastar. I might have that
Okay.
backwards, but either way, get either of those two lenses. I've shot them. The images are fantastic, easily on par with any 6x9 Zeiss I've shot. And like I said, they definitely fly under the radar. I mean, there's certainly other 6x9 cameras, but I'm a big fan of the Kodak Tourist.
I'm looking at them and the prices are all under $100.
Yeah,
Very nice. Okay. I'll keep that in mind. The tourists are mostly 620 though, right?
true. Yeah, that's true. You're right. They are 620. It's very easy to respool though. I mean, that to me, that should never be a reason not to buy it.
Okay.
It as long as you and if you need a 620 spool, I'll send you some. But all you need is you really need two of them. But you really, if that would be better to have two. But you can get by with only one, and you could respool it in a dark bathroom in 90 seconds.
Okay. And you said it's with the Anaston.
Or the Anastar, the whichever the better one of those two are. I could just look it up, but there's an Anaston and Anastar. The Anastars are a little bit more rare,
Okay.
and they're great, but you don't have to get that one. Either the 3.5 or the 4.5 lenses, you will not be unhappy with the images.
Fantastic. How does it compare to the Bessa?
Well, not the Apolanthar that Paul is holding on to. You still have it, Paul?
Yeah, I still have it. I'm having a hard time with that one. I'm really hoping nobody buys it.
Right. Okay. So you want to keep it, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. I sold my Plabel 69W Pro Shift, so that means I'm down to two 6x9 cameras, just the Horseman convertible and the Mamiya Super 23.
So have you found any of the Kurt cameras where you've said, I'm definitely keeping this one, or many, or no? Are you just kind of seeing what sticks?
No, I'm trying to think because I always try to keep something, and there are a couple that I have in the showcase that I'm not actively trying to sell. But yeah, that might be one of them. It's just that's such a valuable camera, and it becomes a question. Well, the Horseman convertible came from Kurt, and that's on the do not sell list.
So you had two of those?
Yeah, you got one.
Yeah, Anthony has it now, but
Anthony
yeah,
has
so I have one, you have one,
Right.
and then the Apolanthar Bessa 6x9. Okay.
Yeah, I have that one still. Bessa 2.
All right.
And you have the Bessa 3 or what it's not, they don't call it a Bessa 3. You have the Fuji version, 670.
Yeah. Right. The Fuji GF 670, I think.
Yeah,
I did a review of it.
Isn't that the same camera as a Bessa 3?
It is. Yeah. There was like the Bessa 3667.
Yes.
Is the full name of it. Yeah.
That's a great camera.
Yeah, that's I love it. I really, really enjoyed it. And I almost would the only reason I would not recommend that to someone like Johnny is I don't think it would hold up to professional use. I feel like it's well made, but I could also see how at a moment's notice it could just stop, and I don't think those would be easy to get fixed. We talked about this before, but my biggest complaint with that camera is the shutter is so quiet, you don't know that it's firing. And I've maybe it's just because I've shot so many questionably working cameras that my mind has become accustomed to hearing the shutter. And when I press the shutter release and it doesn't feel like anything happened, I can't compute that I got my image. So other than that, though, if Johnny, you wanted a casual 6x7 camera just for fun, that you would not be unhappy with the images from that one.
Yeah. I was reading your write up on that, and I think you and I discussed that a little bit too. Because it converts to 6x6 also, right?
It does both.
So,
Yep.
Yeah. So it would actually fit my bill. I was looking at that and actually just really kind of considering it if I could deal with that 3.5 lens, but the between the additional size that's not necessary for me, the slower lens, and I used to be a Bessa R2 owner, so I'm familiar with Cosina's sort of quasi professional build quality, and I mean, maybe if I handled one I might feel differently, but it sounds like you might have confirmed things for me. Yeah, I don't think I could kick that camera around too hard at a at a wedding.
No,
So.
and I don't know that to be true. For all I know, they're very rugged. But if you were to just say, Mike, guess, is this camera going to hold up? I would lean towards the no side.
Johnny, I've got another one that we might want to sort of consider here. 6 by
Okay.
6. It's 6 by 6. It's not quite a 2.8 lens. It's a 2.9 lens. So, I think we could split the difference there. It's a Balda Super Baldex with the Radianar 80mm 2.9 lens, Schneider Kusdak lens. So good quality lens. What I like about this one is the actual focus patch for the rangefinder is massive inside it. It's this big square right in the middle of it. The one thing that it does actually have a bit quirky is that it's got the double exposure prevention, but it does to actually cock the shutter. It's weird because you actually turn the film transport knob one way to move the film, and then the other way to cock the shutter. I can't remember which sequence you do it. I haven't used it for a while, but you do it, one before the other. So you literally you're turning towards the right, and then you're turning towards the left, or vice versa. So it's really bizarre. But the Radianar lens is a really, really nice lens. It's a Schneider lens. I mean, what can you say more to that? Great focusing patch in the middle. I was just having another look through it and reminding myself. The only weird thing is you really need to hold it by your left hand because when you open the door in the front, it's just really, really hard to hold there. So I can see looking at AJ, he's gotten very interested in this one.
What was the model again? Which camera is that?
The Balda Super Baldex.
Yeah, that was on my short list too. But if I'm not mistaken, I think the viewfinder or the rangefinder is not coupled. Is that accurate?
Well, this one's coupled because as I move
Oh,
it
is it?
in and out, it
Oh, okay.
focuses. There is another rangefinder on top which is not coupled, but that's only so you can actually work out the depth of field.
Okay, maybe I misread something about that. Cool.
Yeah,
I'll put that back on my
yeah.
list then.
But that's definitely not coupled up the top, but it is really just so you can actually work out the depth of field.
Oh man.
Okay. Okay.
We need to consider having AJ as like our eBay secretary for every episode. So like as the camera is mentioned, he pulls it up on eBay and does like a little ticker across the bottom of the screen. The current price for this camera
is. Oh, but I love this one though.
It's nice, isn't it?
It is. And it's in my range too.
Yeah, they look like they're great. Built really great.
They're heavy.
Looks like a comfortable. Heavy. Probably a lot like the Zeiss, but maybe a little cleaner aesthetically.
So Theo, what have you been shooting lately
I've been shooting a couple
besides the Mamiya 7?
couple of things. I've been shooting my Nikon S2, which has been really nice. Got some fast film in there. I've actually got film that I brought back from Vietnam, 3200, which went through the scanner. So I'm interested to see what happens with this. Always one not to sort of waste it. I'm also shooting my Olympus Pen FT. Got the 38mm and the 100mm lens for this one. Beautiful camera. Bulk loaded some film into it. And you'd think by this stage of collecting and using cameras that, if you're bulk loading film from a half frame camera, that you would, maybe not necessarily put the whole 36 exposures in there so you can end up with 72 shots. But no, I went the whole way. and now it's just taking a bit of while to sort of get through it all. That's one of them. But my highlight recently is my Robot 2, which is a beautiful little square format camera. I loaded the canister. Now, I wrote to Anthony a little while back and said, "Oh, I'm about to load the Robot 2. Any instructions?" And he must have been away, and by the time I got impatient, so I jumped in, loaded it, went out and shot with it, and then went to the lab last week to pick up the film and looked at the frame and thought, there's a picture of a sign there, but the writing's all backwards. What the hell's going on here? And then it sort of struck me, okay, maybe I put the film in the back, back to front. red scaled it without thinking about it. And I thought, well, hang on a second, but these frames aren't that badly exposed. So, if I was red scaling it, surely I've got it totally wrong. I would have got the exposures wrong. Well, what happened was I actually forgot what film I put in, and I put in Ultramax 400, and I'd actually thought I'd put in Gold 200. So I was overexposing every frame anyway. So I ended up with this nice, red scale set of pictures from the Robot 2, which is not exactly how you should test a camera. Had a bit of a play. I think I might just put some regular film in it next time and just the normal way and just, test it out properly.
It's a happy accident, though, to get not only red scale, not only overexposed, but backwards images.
Which happens when you red scale. Yeah, you end up flipping it over anyway. But it's really just a lot of happy accidents in a row.
So I have a question.
Sure.
I've never done red scale. I understand the concept of it, but what happens if you reverse black and white film? Is it just darker? I don't suppose it would it look different though, or would you just lose a couple stops?
I think you would just lose a couple of stops and maybe some contrast.
This happened to me in film school. We somebody loaded a 16 millimeter Ariflex with the film backwards, and the difference was, it was underexposed, and when it was scanned, and I think it might have been Tri-X that we were shooting, and when it was scanned, I remember it came out orange because of the base color. They scanned it in color, obviously. So
yeah, I wonder though if in losing some contrast, that might be a way to tone down some of these super high contrasts. Like, who's that company that uses recording film, but people shoot photos on it?
Is that Japan Camera Hunters stuff?
Yeah. There's one where I forget what it's called, but that might work because I've seen some of those images where it's like it's meant for recording of documents, so it has almost no shadow detail. It's all like highs and blacks at the same time, but I don't know.
Well, I think the compromise of shooting on the opposite side too was it's not as sharp, believe it or not. It's only a micro thin, difference, but I remember that
You're out of the film plan.
Yeah, that at least with motion picture with the Ariflex 16 millimeter, that the images were softer too. Yeah.
Well, and if you do that with remjet film, you're not going to get anything because the remjet layer would just block it entirely. So you'd have to have actual photograph. All right. Anyway, well, if anybody's listening to this episode at whatever point we get it out, and you've purposely reversed black and white film, let us know what your results were like.
I've reversed black and white film before in 120, and it doesn't work because there's this thing called paper in the back.
Yeah. That'll do it.
Yeah, the RB67. If anyone's used them, that will know that it's actually very easy to get your film in back to front in that one, and if you're in a hurry, especially. And I've done that once, and you come back and it's very clean pictures. It's there's no it's just very minimalistic.
I can't remember who makes it. Paul Rudy got one from Kurt. It's called the Cyclops. It's this weird French camera where the lens and shutter like stick up above the body of the camera.
Right.
And I'm talking about, the light goes in that, and then there's mirrors, and it exposes the film from the back.
Right.
So when you load this camera, you have to have the emulsion facing backwards. I don't know why they did it that way, but they just wanted to be different apparently. But that's an example of a camera where you don't have the emulsion facing forward on purpose. That's a neat one.
It sounds like the design of some of those instant backs where the image is projected via mirror down onto it's pretty wacky.
What do they call that? Like a fundus? Isn't that how the fundus cameras worked? Or am I confusing technologies?
Well, Nikon had the speed magnes.
The magnes, that's it.
Yeah, that was a Polaroid. It did use mirrors to go down.
Yeah.
Cheap.
Okay. Well, I'll share one more that I shot recently, and this was an $8 eBay special. I had it on my watch list for like 3 cycles, and nobody bought it. Blurry pictures. It was body only. It didn't have a lens, but it was the Hexacon, which is really just a Pentacon sold, I think, in the United States. I think this was imported to the US this way. They literally riveted a new plate on top of the front of the prism. And I have two other versions of this camera, the Contax D, and then I have one called the Pentacon FM, which look basically the same. And I did not realize it, but I've become a huge fan of these cameras. The feel of them, the ergonomics of them, they're knob wind. They have the front angled shutter release, fairly dark viewfinder, so they're not too good at composing stop down, but they have the Zeiss preset lenses, or at least that's what I had mounted on it. And I just really enjoyed the process of shooting this camera. Just the feel of it, the sound of the shutter, it's unlike any other camera. And for $8, I put my own lens on it, and it was one of those rare examples where I just spontaneously loaded up some black and white T Max, took it out for a couple shots, and I just really find myself enjoying it. And I'm realizing more and more lately that I need to get back to shooting cameras for fun, because I enjoy them and because I want to use them just for no other reason other than to, shoot them and not for a review for the site. So that's kind of a transition that I'm reconciling with myself, is allowing myself to enjoy some of these cameras. In the last episode, Jim Gray talked about his process of paring his collection down, thinning the herd is how he described it. And he wanted to get down to about 50 cameras of only the ones that he really, really liked. And while I could never get down to 50, I do want to try and limit myself maybe next year to just shooting some cameras that I actually just enjoy shooting.
I will have you shooting a Mamiya 7 before you know it, mate.
I don't, I don't have one. And the problem is, Theo, and I've told you this before, is that I have the Mamiya 6, which is so good. And it's not a folder, but it does have a collapsible lens. So
Yeah,
I have a
nice
lens hood on it. When it's collapsed, it's very compact. But
I must admit, I wouldn't mind having the 6 as well, but I think that's getting a little bit too extravagant.
I have the 50 millimeter wide angle on it right now, the 50 millimeter f4, and I have one of the tellies. I don't have the standard lens, ironically, but I like having the wide angle on it. And I love how the frame lines automatically adjust depending on which lens you have on it. Like it just knows. It's kind of like the Leica had the little feeler, like it could tell which lens you have, and it only shows you the frame lines that apply to what. And I wear prescription glasses, and I can barely see all 4 lines at the same time. It's so big.
Yeah. Does the 6 have the availability? I can't remember if the 6 can do the pano kit or not. I know the 7 obviously does because I use it all the time.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know how it would.
Is there like a screw down the bottom of where the film supply is, which, if there is, that it probably does take the attachment? Because the one thing I like about the Mamiya 7 is you can put the pano kit on and it's actually it does. So you can actually take it.
It does, because I got one from Kurt.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I did. I had one. Let's put it that way.
They're a hot item.
Yeah.
The first time I ever picked up this camera, it was in such nice shape. I assumed it would work, but it was like locked up. And I didn't know what was wrong with it, but I didn't understand about the dark slide. Once the dark slide is shut, because it looks like it, when you open up the film compartment, it looks like it's got a focal plane shutter, but it's really just a cloth curtain that's there to block the film plane while you swap lenses. So with this camera, if somehow another person were to come across one like I did, and that curtain is shut, it locks up the shutter mechanism. It won't let you fire it with the dark slide in place. So you have to open it up before it allows you, because it's just a leaf shutter camera.
And it's a very dramatic opening, isn't it? Because you sort of switch and you feel like the thing's going to fly over your hands.
Thunk. Yeah. All right. Does anybody have anything else? Any questions? Any recent adventures that they've had they want to share?
I've been testing out an early uncoated Biogon on a Contax 2 for, I guess, what would be an inevitable review of the lens on some type of blog, in part because there are almost no images taken with that lens on film on the internet.
Which Contax body are you testing it on?
On a pre-war Contax 2. Yeah.
Okay.
Which, and so not being able to find pretty much any images shot on film on that lens was kind of the impetus for, well, I might as well do it and put them online.
Are there not that many images on film for it because people are using them on digital, or what's
the pre-war Biogon, basically the only cameras you can shoot it on are Contax 1 and Contax 2, and then Nikon rangefinders. And then, so a lot of people aren't really shooting those. And then people aren't really shooting it on digital because it's difficult to adapt, and because the rear element protrudes so much. Most modern sensors have issues with the color fringing at the borders, and so people are just not, I think, interested in putting up with that. And so I think it's a couple factors for why there's basically no representation of the lens online.
I can't remember who posted it, but it was one of our listeners on the Camerosity Facebook page took my advice and got a Contax One CLA'd by Radu. And we were briefly talking about just how much of a joy those cameras are to use. And while I do have a nice pre-war two that I do like to use, I think the reputation is that the twos and threes were much better than the ones. So therefore the ones must not be fun to shoot. But I don't find that to be true. I think they're just as good of shooters, but the caveat being you got to find one in good operating condition. Paul, you had two, and one of them died in your hands, right?
One of them died in my hands during the camera show. The one of them was nice. I mean, the shutter was firing on both of them, but the one that died, I noticed there was some frayed silk. That was I could actually see it on the back shutter, and I could just see. I mean, I knew it was a ticking bomb, and finally I fired it, and it went kerthunk, and that was the end of it. So
that was the same exact condition, the one that I had that Radu restored. You could see the frayed silk curtains from sticking out the side. It was Dean Blumberg was who did it. He had his restored, and he was our South Africa caller. I'd forgotten his name in the last episode too. So he got one working. So there's at least two CLA'd Contax ones done within the last couple of years.
I had Olin do one, so there's a couple more. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. We'll see. We're starting to have a Contax one.
I really cannot speak more highly of the pre-war Contaxes. How well the rangefinders have aged, the clarity after cleaning it beats, I think, pretty much every rangefinder up until the M3 for me.
Well, that's the point I made earlier at the beginning of the show, is that they're prisms. When you get a prism viewfinder, if it's clean, that is, and not physically damaged, because they can break if you drop them. But assuming they're in operating condition, a prism viewfinder is always going to be brighter and offer better contrast than a beam splitter would, at least up until the later years. You know, like an M6 is wonderful, right? It doesn't have prisms, but in terms of pre-war, yeah, it's really, really nice.
And the shutters are so quiet.
And that's where, you know, if you read the history of Heinz Kuppenbender, who designed that camera, you know, Lights had released the Leica in like 25, 26. It started gaining some steam by the end of the 20s. And Zeiss-Ikon had nothing even close to it. Their smallest camera in the late 20s, or, you know, 1930 was the what was that 127 camera I loaned you, Miles?
The Colibri.
The Colibri, yeah. The Colibri would have been the most compact portable camera that Zeiss made in the late 20s, and they didn't have anything to compete with Leica. So when it came time, like, well, we need a camera like that too. You know, back then they were called miniature cameras. They did what any typical Zeiss designer would do and overcomplicated the crap out of it. You know, they added the dual bayonet, the prism viewfinder, the ridiculously complicated shutter, a front knob shutter speed selector. I mean, you know, we think of Leicas as these complex precision machines, which they are, but compared to the Contax, the Leica was a simple camera. And and another example of less is more. The Leicas not only sold better, they were less expensive to make, they were easier to fix. The one thing that they lacked, at least back then, was the reputation of the Zeiss lenses. But what they did have wasn't really too bad, though. So I don't think it hurt them. But I think that's how the Leica became so popular, is that they didn't overcomplicate it. And you know, and I don't want to get into the whole story, but the fact that it was invented by Oscar Barnack as a shutter speed tester for a cinema camera is part of the reason why they didn't overcomplicate it, because it was kind of like, it wasn't even meant to be a camera in the first place. So the Leica is the most successful 35 millimeter camera ever made, but it was almost created by accident.
Mike, one thing I noticed, I've kind of gotten in, somehow I've avoided, not intentionally, picking up Zeiss products for like the duration of my photographic history. But I was given a few and then got this Ikonta, and so I've got a few going on right now. And looking them up, I'm finding it's so much harder to find out any kind of details about the history of Zeiss, and that than Leica, and I don't know. I'd be interested in whatever your thoughts are on that.
You mean the company itself, or the
Yeah, yeah.
context specifically?
Yeah, the history of the company itself. It just seems like every Leica model seems to come with like a big story behind it that's very accessible. But with Zeiss, with the different companies involved and stuff, it's hard to figure out even where a specific camera was made.
Mike can definitely help you because he's very welcome at the Zeiss Historical Society. They love him there.
I got kicked out. So I am reluctant to really go into too much detail about Zeiss because I love many of the cameras, and I know there's a lot of great Zeiss collectors, but they're unforgiving if you get something wrong. I was doing an article on the wartime Leicas, the Wehrmacht Leicas, and I just emailed Jim Lager. And I said, hey, Jim, he's like one of the most respected Leica historians out there. And I said, I have some questions about these cameras. He's like, yeah, just what do you want to know? So I typed up like a list of 10 or 12 questions I had. He goes, I'll just give you my book. It'll answer all the questions you want. And he was so helpful and so kind and so willing to share information. Whereas if I get a spelling of a word wrong and I'm doing a Zeiss review, I get lambasted and kicked out of forums. So if you've noticed a lack of too much history of Zeiss on this show, that's why. But I do want to cover it though, because it really is fascinating. There's so many worthwhile cameras. I love Leicas, but I love Contaxes too. It's like I love Coke and Pepsi. I don't think you have to deny one just because you like the other. They're great cameras for different reasons. I enjoy shooting them both. And I would love to cover them a little bit in greater detail. But if you do have questions, Larry Gubas's Zeiss in Photography. Sadly, this book is almost unobtainium, right, Paul?
Oh,
These
yeah.
things are hard
Yep.
to find.
Yep.
And unfortunately, Larry passed away in 2019, or it might have even been the very, very beginning of 2020. And I don't know that there's any plans to reprint the book, but that's why they're kind of hard to find. But maybe in a future episode, I will dare venture into the wonderful world of Zeiss history.
Well, you know what? There's one way the Zeiss people can make sure we get it correct. They can come on the show.
Come on the show. Yeah.
Well, I found even just like some of the issues that I've been discussing with the Super Ikonta. There's a few scant websites that have some detailed information about that stuff, but I'm finding it difficult to find detailed, practical information for some of this stuff. And I know people know it, but it just doesn't seem to be as widely discussed. Like in the Leica forums, it's just like everybody's arguing and sharing this and sharing that just constantly. I'm not seeing that as much. Maybe I just haven't found the right places.
Go to my site. I know, surprise, surprise, I'm going to talk about my website. But I mean, go to my website, do it on a desktop computer. Don't do it on a smartphone. At the very top, right next to reference library, you'll see the word Zeiss. Click on that. And I have scans of every single issue of the Zeiss Historica newsletter from 1979 to 2016. How I was able to pull this off was that Larry Gubas gave me the scans and very specifically granted me permission to share them, because I am certain that would have ruffled some feathers if I had not gotten this permission. He even wrote an intro for me covering a little bit of the history of the group. But I have every single issue. I did at one point try to make an attempt to create a table of contents, of which I just ran out of desire to do it because there's so much in there. But I do have a list of what articles are in which issue. So it's not in any real order other than alphabetical order. But if you're just looking to learn something about a specific kind of Zeiss camera, go there and just start looking through some of the issues. They were 2 issues per year. I think there was 1 year they only did 1. But again, I have every issue from 1979 to 2016 when the group ceased to exist. So that's, while I'm not suggesting there aren't better resources out there, to my knowledge, I have the only complete collection of every issue all in one place.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely check it out.
All right, guys, we're running towards the end of the show here. Wanted to thank AJ, Miles, and Johnny for coming. We did not have Well, originally we were going to try and get Anthony Hands to come on. He was going to share us some details about the Rolly 35, but he couldn't make it. So maybe a future episode. We at one point weren't even going to do a show today, but we just wanted to have a show in the spirit of open source podcast and just start recording and see which way it went. And I love these episodes because literally everything we talked about today, none of this was planned. And I love hearing stories from all you guys. So if does anybody have any last minute requests?
We're going to do medium format SLRs next time.
Yes. So what kind of brands will we discuss, Paul?
We will discuss Kowa, Pentax, Hasselblad. Well, no, we're not going to do Hasselblad. Everybody's done Hasselblad. We will do who else? Mike?
Bronica.
We got to do Bronica. Yeah, we got to do
Bronica.
Bronica.
Yeah.
Mamiya.
Mamiya. The Mamiya 7 is not an SLR, Theo.
Yeah, but the RB67 is.
That's true. You're right. It is. I have shot a Pentacon 6.
Mike is going to shoot a roll through the Kowa before this next episode.
It's loaded. I have it
Okay,
loaded
all right.
I even loaded a roll of 220 in it so I could get 24 shots out of it instead of 12.
That's really a nice camera. You're going to enjoy it. It's got the brightest viewfinder.
Yeah, no, I've already started. I think I got through a couple shots already through it. I just didn't have a chance to really spend a thorough amount of time with it. But so far, my initial impressions of it, I agree with you. It's very, very pleasurable to shoot. So, all right, we're going to do the medium format SLR episode with all of your medium format SLR sans Hasselblad dreams come true. We will record 2 weeks from today, which would be October 14th at the usual time. And as always, the topics and discussions on the Camerosity podcast are influenced and inspired by you. We love hearing new people join us, beginners, veterans of all kinds, ages, nationalities, whatnot. So if you have a question for us or just want to chat and share your recent pickups, we'd love to hear from you. So everybody have a good night and enjoy the rest of your week.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Hey, thanks a lot. See you guys.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. And now for the Camerosity Personal Classified.
So I just moved to Portland, Oregon. And so if there is anybody, any listeners who are in the Portland, Oregon area and want to go shooting, find me on the Camerosity Facebook page. Would love to meet people in real life who are fans of this podcast.
Hello, guys. Hey, where is everybody? I thought we were recording a podcast tonight. I mean, I just got off my flight and drove home, and yeah, I know it's midnight, but where is everybody?